I'm Marc Naddell. I'd like to welcome everybody to this webinar. We have a very special guest today. Dr. Sarabeth Berk is the leading expert on hybrid professional identity and is a hybrid professional herself. And if you don't know what hybrid professional identity is, why it's important, and how you can explore creating one on your own and using it to your benefit, then you're on the right webinar. Sarabeth or Dr. Berk, what do you prefer I call you, Sarabeth or Dr.
Tonight you can say Sarabeth, thank you.
Okay. Sarabeth, welcome. Let me welcome you and give a very brief introduction. Sarabeth has been featured in Forbes and is a TEDx speaker. She's the author of More Than My Title and is also the recipient of Colorado Inno on Fire. That's an award for her innovative work. Her hybrid title is Creative Disruptor because she works at the intersection of being an artist, a researcher, an educator, and also a designer. Through her groundbreaking research, Sarabeth developed a one-of-a-kind approach that takes personal branding and career development to a whole new level. It's quite a unique concept. I was able to talk with her briefly earlier and was really impressed with how unique it is and how deep her research has gone. So without further ado, I'd like to ask Sarabeth if there's anything she would like to add to my introduction.
I mean, that was a great reading of my bio. Thank you so much, Marc. I can give a little more backstory. Do you want me to jump into that?
Yes, please.
Awesome. Everybody, I'm so glad to be here. It's really a pleasure to get to share what I do and what I'm passionate about, and then talk about the benefit for you, because I've met thousands of professionals. And in the modern workforce, it is really hard to communicate who you are and why you do what you do. We're all put up in those positions where you meet someone and you're networking, or you're in an interview, or you're going for promotion, or you're between jobs. And people are like, what do you do? And answering that question has just been so much anxiety for me, because I do a lot of things. I have a bunch of talents. I have multiple degrees. I have backgrounds and skills and years of experience. But how do I say that in a nutshell? And so this idea of defining your true professional identity has been something that's honestly haunted my entire career path. So let me rewind for a moment to show you how I got here. I started in art school. My background is in art and design and education. And when I graduated from college, I felt completely lost. People are like, you can do anything you want, pick a path. And I thought, I have so many paths I want to do. Which one do I choose? How do I just be one thing? And so I ended up on a journey. I went in the classroom for a bit, then I worked in nonprofits. Ultimately, what was happening is I was choosing a job or taking on a role and becoming what they wanted me to be in that role. I would become the thing or the person they needed, and I would be that one professional identity at a time. But for someone like me, who is very curious and loves a lot of things, I wasn't satisfied just closing myself down and only teaching and then only doing design. And I felt crazy. I was like, what is wrong with me? Why can't everybody else feel confident and secure in a job, but I'm the one that wants to change? So I thought going to grad school would fix this. I went to get my PhD. And this is when I had a complete professional identity meltdown. And I didn't even know you could have a professional identity crisis. I think that's something we need to open up and talk about more as a culture. And a professional identity crisis is when you totally lose a sense of yourself. You don't know who you are. You don't know how to explain what you're doing next or what you're doing now. You sort of ramble on about all the different parts and things you can do, but you just don't know how to make a clear picture and story because you don't know yourself. So when I realized that was my root problem, it wasn't that I didn't have passions. I had so many. It was that I didn't know how to explain who I was when I was following many things. So my research during grad school became, first of all, how am I more than a job title? What does a job title even mean? And if I'm someone who has multiple professional identities, who am I at the intersection of them? And so that question is what drives me today and causes me to speak to many audiences, is helping people understand You can be a hybrid of many professional identities, and that intersection has really special value. And for people that aren't a hybrid, they need to also understand what their professional identity is in general. And so today, I am helping people, first of all, realize what professional identity is. That is different than your job title. Second, I help people redefine and rename who they are really in their work. And then third, I help them communicate. It's all about how do you show that value through your digital presence, through conversations, through a resume, whatever tools. But if you can't help other people understand it, they'll never see you the way you want to be seen. So that's a little bit of how I got here. And I feel like the journey's just started, Mark. I have so much more energy and passion to keep pushing this and growing this.
Right. Yeah, you've written a book about this, and you've actually coined this term, hybrid professional identity.
Yeah.
And you've mentioned a bit about, you know, starting in one area and getting more education and schooling and getting a PhD. And then how did you actually develop this unique topic?
Yeah, it was a lot of observation. I mean, I'm a researcher, so it's collecting data. First of all, it's my lived experience. What pain points, frustration was I experiencing in my career journey? And for me, it was nobody knows who I really am. I don't think so. I realized I have a bunch of professional identities. I'm an artist, a researcher, an educator, designer. Most people didn't know that about me. So that was bucket number one. Bucket number two, I started interviewing people. I watched them in their work. I went to, their office or their studio and would see them doing things that went beyond their job title. And then I would interview them about that and say, hey, I noticed you have this like jewelry station in the corner, or you have photos of this hanging on your wall. Like, tell me more about that. What is that about? And they're like, oh, I love to like be a kind of a therapist, or I'm training to be a yoga teacher on the side. Like, these are other parts of me that actually I bring to my work. And I was like, interesting. And so then the third part of research is looking at other theories, other literature, and there's a whole theory around intersectionality, which is race, class, and gender, that it started in that idea of you are a combination of different identities. And I said, can I borrow the idea of intersectionality, but just isolate it within our work, just add it to our professional life? And sure enough, I found that held true, that is a real thing happening for people. So that's a little bit how I got started into the research. And one thing led to another. I knew after I did my dissertation that this needed to be a book someday. And then it took a couple more years and I did a TEDx. And then people say, when's the book coming out? So right before COVID is when I wrote the book. And then it came out in 2020.
So that killed the book tour.
I did. It was the virtual book tour. Yes.
So you're going to have to write another book so you can finally get that book tour.
I want that. That's what I'm working on next.
Very cool. And I know in the audience, everyone has heard of having a professional brand. And
Yes.
this is not the same thing. This is
Correct.
clearly something unique. Maybe you can talk about
Yeah.
the difference or how they feed into each other.
Would love to. So something that's really unique about me and what I do, I'm connecting three different fields of research together that I haven't seen anyone else do. So I'm really studied in identity development. That's how do humans grow? How do we change from a youth and an adolescent into an adult, and the different milestones we hit in our life journey? That's identity development as humans. So I look a lot at that literature because there's ideas there that actually apply to our careers. Then I also study career development information and theories and tools and assessments. And I also study personal branding. Personal branding, my definition, is the act of intentionally putting your identity into the world. So if you don't know who you are, how are you going to brand that? You have to start with your identity first. And for me, it's the world of our work, just what we do for whatever we get paid or put on our LinkedIn. Because if you're trying to brand your whole self, then you have to bring in personal and social and all kinds of other identities. And many people need to do that. But I help people that are just in a professional space figure out how do they talk about themselves. So the personal brand is once you figure out your professional identity, then it's how do you show up in LinkedIn? How do you write about yourself? What images do you use? What are all the traits that you put into the world to represent that identity?
It sounds like it's more the strategic aspect of the the brand,
Yes.
figuring out what you need, who you are and what you want to share, right?
Yes. Yeah, totally. I mean, if you think about a company, just let's take it to nuts and bolts.
Yeah,
When a company is building their brand, they literally start with the brand identity. And so it's no different with humans. You have to start with your professional identity before you turn it into the brand of you.
makes perfect sense.
Yeah.
Let me just welcome everyone again. Now that we have the chat up and running,
Awesome.
feel free to type your questions into the chat box, and we'll do our best to cover all the questions that come up there. We certainly have a lot of material to cover on our own, but we're here for the audience. So if we get questions from the audience, we'll be sure to work those in.
I love that.
Um,
Please ask questions.
Hey, can you talk about your process a bit?
Yeah. Well, how about I start more with the framework? Is that okay first? Because then I can talk
Absolutely.
about how it flows.
Yes.
So let me just paint this picture. If you go to my website, morethanmytitle.com, you'll see a page that is my framework. And the framework is really the basic argument. We've My observation is in society, we've been stuck in a binary of either calling people you're an expert or you're a generalist. You fall into one of two categories. But for a lot of people, that doesn't feel right anymore because they're somewhere in between. They're like, I'm an expert in one or two or three things. And I also have a lot of knowledge in other things. Like, can't I be both? Why do I have to choose? Or it's hard. And so that's the world that I start to unpack. So my framework goes like this. There are three types of professional identity. And it's really important that all of us know which one we are so we can work better together. The first type I call singularity. The second is multiplicity. And the third is hybridity. Let me define each one. So singularity, I think of it like circles. You only have one professional identity. Some people I've met, they're like, I am a gastroenterologist. I am a software engineer. I am a ballet dancer. They're like, that's all I am. And that's great. Sometimes we reference those people as experts or specialists, obviously. Then the next group is multiplicity. So I think of it as like having many circles.
Mm.
That's having many professional identities. Terms we use for this group are gig workers and multi-talented and freelancers, multi-passionate, Renaissance souls, polymaths. There's like 30 terms I've found for this group.
Mm.
What's interesting in this group is you can have many professional identities because you've changed jobs over the years, or maybe you're in one role and you're just doing a lot of different things in that one role. It's sort of up to you to say, yeah, I have a lot of hats I wear.
Mm.
So then let's move to hybridity, the last one. Hybridity is more like this circle artwork I have behind me. It's a Venn diagram. So you have the definition of a hybrid professional identity is someone who has multiple professional identities, but works at the intersection of them. It's that integration point right there that makes them different. Instead of just wearing a lot of hats, those hats are being worn simultaneously and you're using them to do something that's hard to define. In fact, it defies categorization. So now that you know those three types of professional identity, the question is, which one are you? Are you singularity? Are you multiplicity? And are you hybridity? Now, the layer up beyond this, and this is kind of where it goes to my book, it's developmental. So people can move back and forth and be different ones at different times of their life. Like right now, I might say, I'm just an expert in this topic, Marc. I am the hybrid professional identity expert. But maybe in 6 months or 5 years from now, I'll be back in hybridity because I'll be blending in my expertise, but maybe I'll be running a business and I'll be, adding some other element and suddenly I'm hybridizing again.
Mm.
So let me also just give my life example. I have 4 professional identities that are my primary. Marc told you I'm an artist, a researcher, a designer, and an educator.
Mm.
And what I realized is I'm blending those together. And then I named who I am at that intersection point. I'm a creative disruptor. I arrived at a name for my hybridity to give myself a new label that is authentically who I am. And what's so stunning when you arrive at this for yourself is I can look back at almost all my past work from, when I was in my 20s and 30s and say, I've always been that creative disruptor. I just never knew it. I didn't know that's what I've been doing this entire time. Instead, I was using just the artist or just the educator, but the hybridity in me was really my true nature. And so this framework of understanding professional identity is how we can help understand each other, communicate to each other, hire talent differently, match people to the right roles. There's a lot of benefits to this, and they all work a little bit differently, but everybody really functions best when they're in their right professional identity type. Like if you take an expert and you're like, now you need to be the hybrid, that person might never feel comfortable trying to be that.
Mm.
So how did that go, Mark? Did I cover enough on that?
Yeah, that went really well. And if people have questions on the framework or the process, I certainly encourage
Sure.
them to write in the chat box so
Perfect.
we can add some detail, if there's some gaps. I did have an observation that it looks like the hybrid professional identity would provide more precision and
Mm.
distinctiveness for the individuals that use it. I'm sure there are even more impacts than just those two.
Yeah, all three of these ideas of singularity, multiplicity, and hybridity is about specificity of who you are and how you are effective and what your best value is for a team. Like if I need someone who can just jump in and kind of pitch hit in a lot of projects, I want someone in multiplicity because they just want to have a lot of projects on their plate that are different. They like to kind of move around between things, maybe between teams. But the hybrid is sort of the synthesizer. They integrate, they move between, they're like, the best term is the silo buster.
Mm.
They can talk to engineering and then talk to the product team and then talk to customers and sort of help all those teams understand each other because they have the hybrid space within them to understand the connections, and other people might not see those connections.
Okay.
Um, yeah, it's really a fascinating way of thinking about people.
We
And
did get a
then,
question in the chat
yeah.
box. Oh, I'm sorry. Were you going to add something to that?
Oh, well, a few moments ago, you asked me about my process. So let's just put that as a future question. I want to come back to that.
Okay. So we have a question from
Yeah.
Heather.
Okay.
Could this hybrid label cause concern of not very specialized in the area? So I guess,
Yeah.
yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. I think I'm understanding, Heather. I'll do my best.
Okay.
So I definitely use caution when using any of this new language I'm giving you, because what I'm talking about is very cutting edge. A lot of companies, this is going to be new information for them. They're going to be like, what are you talking about? And literally, it's helping educate people and build awareness that this is even in existence and that this is something we need to be understanding more. So you would have to educate whoever you're using this language with of, hey, I call myself a hybrid professional. Let me explain why. And you can't assume they'll just understand. One other caveat, we are in a very strange situation, and it's happened with COVID, where hybrid work has become everywhere. It's so widespread. And what happened, I've been doing this research for over a decade. So I've been thinking about hybridity much longer than the pandemic. But with hybrid work, people started thinking my work was about the hybrid work movement, working at home or in person and the connection between the two. And I was like, no, no, no. I'm not about the location, physical or in person, or digital. I'm looking at identity being hybrid. So helping people even wrap their head around the idea that professionals can be hybrid is another level that's sort of stretching people's minds. So that's why definitions matter. Um, the last thing I want to say on this too is there's a lot of tools and tricks on my website. So I don't want to go too deep. A lot of people still need a formal job title. I don't want you to think you just delete that and call yourself a hybrid. The reason is there's hierarchy and structure around being a program director or head of sales, whatever you are. What I train people to do is a double intro. You need to use your title for formality, but then adding on, so I used to say it like this: I'm Sarabeth, I'm the director of this program, but I call myself a creative disruptor because I'm able to connect people in these programs by challenging assumptions and pushing ideas in new ways. So I would use my title, I'd use my hybrid title of how I see myself, and then I'd give a very short explanation or something to sort of help them see what I meant. We can explain that more later, so I want to stop on that one.
Yeah, that makes sense because HR may say, we don't have a creative disruptor on our pay scale.
I know.
It's good to include both of those.
Exactly. Okay. Good
Another,
question.
we have another question that came in.
Okay.
How to leverage the hybrid professional identity on various social media channels, like on a LinkedIn profile.
Yeah. So case by case situation. Everyone's work situation is different. If you do a lot of things and it's confusing to you or confusing to your audience, then my first question would be, what do you work at the intersection of? And you can only have 3 or 4 parts that you're at an intersection of at any time. Otherwise, it's too many. And you're adding in things that are sort of like subdominant. So you're trying to find the most important parts. So for instance, if you do a lot of things, pick the 3 that are the top. So for me, I was like, okay, I'm an artist, I'm an educator, and I'm a designer. Let me focus on those. Now, you don't have to know the name of what that space is, the thing you do between them, but at a minimum, help your audience understand I work at the intersection of art and design and research, or education and research, so that they understand you are in a space between. Even just the language, I work at an intersection, is a trigger that changes how people see you. So that's a tool I recommend for LinkedIn, especially, but you could try it on other social media too.
We do have one of the audience that wants to ask some advice from the doctor. It's more of an application of the concept.
Okay.
So they have a situation where the boss says, you're an employee, you work for me, you're on my team. And if you have time to be all these different things and have all these other, demands for your time, I don't want you to work for me. I don't think you should have time to do all these other things.
Yeah.
You're not working hard enough, this kind of thing. So how would you react to that question?
I think I hear those stories often, and it's a symptom of a few things. One, that's an old mindset, to be honest. A lot of employers that are saying all your time is for me don't understand the gig economy. They don't understand freelancing. They don't understand open talent. There's all these other movements with millions of workers doing multiple things. So first of all, they're just kind of old school. The second thing is you really have to decide, do I want to work for this person?
Right.
If they're holding you back, then you are making the decision to not use those other parts of yourself or not make them visible and known. What I've found is that some people are able to do this, but eventually it catches up with them, meaning they feel burned out, they feel dissatisfied, they sort of become gloomy and demoralized because you're suffocating the other parts of yourself to just be this one thing because you're scared or you'll get in trouble, and it starts to mess with their life. And so if you don't make that decision, sometimes life will make it for you. But either you need to have a conversation with your boss to say, these things are important to me, and here's how they help my work, and here's the application my ability to do coding or my interest in photography is bringing to my work here. So show a connection. Or you have to decide, am I staying in this job and I just have to deal with what my boss says? Those are kind of the 2 sides I've seen. Marc, do you have more thoughts on that?
Yeah, I had a very similar reaction when I was reading the question to you. I was just thinking, toxic work environment,
Yeah.
toxic boss. And sometimes a subordinate is not going to be able to change that boss, right? The only way you can change that boss is to leave that boss. So I was thinking the same as you. Like, that person's old school and they probably think they're smarter than you or more, have more power. They own you. That's all unhealthy, right?
Yeah. It's a great question, though.
It is. I was also thinking, how you might, while you're stuck working there in that role for that person, perhaps you reframe that personal identity that you share, so it's all related to your function under that person.
Yeah, like when I realized, my artist identity. So I was working at a university. My role was to run an entrepreneurship program. That has nothing to do with art. It's about business creation and running ideas. The artist in me is such a core part of how I think, how I visualize. I draw diagrams. I'm very, it's my creative spirit. And so even though the content itself wasn't art, I was using an artistic mindset in approaching this job. And when I started to reveal to people, like, I have 2 art degrees, I got hired to do this entrepreneurship thing, and I can't suppress my art background, like that's coming through. And they're like, Sarabeth, that's why we love you in this role. You come with such a fresh lens. You're helping us. We've been doing this content for so long. We've never seen it differently. We just do what we've always done. So the divergent thinking and divergent identities can play really nice together, but you have to kind of show why. You can't just assume other people will get it. Like, you have to show the application.
So you mentioned that there's the single, there's the multiplicity, and then
Yeah.
the hybrid. Um, in all cases, what drives change between those different ones, or even within
Mm.
hybrid, from one hybrid description to another identity?
Yeah, that's a big question. So essentially, any identity, whether it's your personal identity or your professional identity, you are who you think you are. You get to choose. So we have some identities that are assigned to us when we're born, and some identities that develop, and many identities that change. Identity can be fixed and fluid. And when you are in a job or you're in your work, you're the one that decides, do I see myself as a software engineer? Do I feel like I am a design strategist? Do I want to be known as head of sales? And literally ask yourself that out loud tonight after this webinar, because it's a checking in. And the clients I work with, they can tell in their body if that resonates with them or not. If they're like, head of sales, am I head of sales? And they're like, well, maybe not. And then you're like, okay, well, what is the deeper thing there? And I can talk about my process in a moment, but literally these words will either land with you or they won't. And so if you feel you're in singularity, you'll know. If you feel like you wear a lot of hats, you'll know. If you feel like there's some kind of connection or intersection between identities, you will know. And that's up to you. So the question we have to ask each other is, well, which one do you think you are? Now, one really, really important part of this is no matter which of the types, singularity, multiplicity, or hybridity you choose, you have to defend it. You have to validate it with evidence. So if you say, oh, I'm in singularity, then you have to tell me why. You have to show me a story or a project or give an example of what you do in your work of why you are just one professional identity. And if you're in multiplicity and hybridity, same thing. Now, this is also really, really important. People get confused between multiplicity and hybridity. They seem similar, but they're very different. Hybridity is where things converge. They're inseparable. So when you're in hybridity, you can't turn on and turn off the other side of you. The two parts are completely intertwined. Let me give an example. I love food. So I've used this in my TEDx talk, but I'll use it here. When you eat a slice of pizza, are you eating a bite of mushroom and then a bite of red pepper and then a bite of tomato and then a bite of cheese? No, you eat the pizza as a melty, gooey, all the flavors are combined. You can't separate them. That's what hybridity is. If you ate one bite at a time of each ingredient, that's multiplicity. They're very discrete and there's no connection. So learning that about yourself is part of the developmental process of, okay, do I think there's intersections between my identities? Maybe, I'm not sure. So that's where the stories of tell me a time when you think you were doing something where you're blending and combining. And we unpack that to see, oh, your hybridity is unconscious. And tapping into it comes through with practice and coaching and stories. So people move around them, Marc.
It's interesting you used that pizza example in the TEDx talk. I don't know if you noticed this, but on that video, you're standing on a rug, a round red rug that looks like a pizza while you're
I
talking.
had never thought about that. You are the first person to say that.
You should watch it again because there was a picture of a pizza behind you with all the mushrooms and sausages
Yeah,
and stuff and
amazing.
vegetables. And then the rug was red with the center was yellow. I was like, she's standing on a pizza.
I'm on a pizza. That's amazing. Yeah, food is interesting. It like we have like there's Asian fusion food, right? Like we literally take different flavors and create something new, and that's what's happening inside of many workers too. Let me talk about my process. Would that be okay, Marc? I feel like I've referenced it a few times.
Please.
So behind me, I've got my book, but there's also a workbook, and I do courses and workshops with teams and companies because understanding your professional identity takes a lot of self-reflection and meta awareness. Like you have to step outside of yourself and study yourself as like, who am I when I am typing memos and making spreadsheets and coordinating with clients? Like, what would I call that part of me? I've never thought of that before. And that's how you figure out your identity. So step one in my process is a baseline. It's sort of just getting acquainted with who are you right now? How do you see yourself? How do other people see you? We interview people to get their input. And we sort of just map out the things you know or don't know or have never thought of before about yourself. Then step 2 is about the professional identity deep dive. We literally brainstorm as many possible professional identity words for you as we can find. I have a great handout on my website, so morethantmytitle.com, and it's under freebies. It's called the Professional Identity Word List. I think there's like 100 terms on there, which help people jumpstart which of these identities sound like you. And every single time people are like, oh my God, I would have never thought to call myself a champion or a catalyst or a navigator or a pathfinder. Like, seeing new words helps you expand your sense of who you really are, as opposed to I'm a director, I'm a strategist, I'm a coach, I'm a writer. So you have to get creative and really brainstorm big. From all the words you collect, then we narrow them down. We find the ones that are your primary professional identities. And this is the stage where if you think you're in singularity, then you're kind of narrowing down to singularity. If you think you're in multiplicity, you're narrowing to those. And if you think you're in hybridity, you're using the primary words, but then you're going to the next step, which is drawing a Venn diagram. And we look at the intersections. So once we draw a Venn diagram, we explore who are you at the intersections. And there's a lot of storytelling and language that comes up. It's very creative, but also it's the stage where people sort of go, my mind hurts. Like, this is really hard. I've never, ever explored this before. So I tell people to be patient. And step 4 is to hybridize. So we take the language you found about yourself, and this works even if you're in multiplicity, and saying, what do we call that? So you play with words. I have a professional identity word math activity. And then the last step is actually deceptively the hardest. It looks easy, but it's just to own it. And what you're actually doing is finding the confidence to go into the world and say, I'm a creative disruptor because I have these 4 different identities and I work at the intersection of them. Nice to meet you. Tell me what you do. And for a lot of people, that's like, whoa, I can't say that. This is weird and strange. So there's a whole testing stage. I never have people just, the first idea is the best and they walk off. I say, test it with a small group first, and then test it with some strangers and see how it feels and make some changes. And you keep kind of going through that for a few months. I have people that it takes 6 months to a year to learn how to grow into this identity because they've never felt empowered to talk about who they are. And it's a very strange thing, but the owning it is when you step into your power as whatever professional identity you really are.
It's a powerful tool.
Yeah.
And I remember you said on a different event. I remember you were explaining how referring to yourself as a vice president or a director is less meaningful nowadays because of the title inflation.
Oh my gosh, yes. Yeah, anybody. I'm CEO of More Than My Title. Like, that's great.
Hey, we want to type your
I've got it just in
website
copy and
into
paste.
the yeah, there we go.
There we go.
Okay, very good.
Yeah, that was easy.
We also
Thanks,
have
everybody.
a question here on what tools or methods can they explore in work to help them develop this hybrid identity,
Yeah,
and how this identity will help them develop leadership and increase visibility.
I love that. That's like a 3-part question. So first of all, I mean, just to be brutally honest, buy my book and the workbook, or I've got online courses that you can go through. I've done like videos on Teachable. You need to be guided to do this self-reflection. I wish I had had these tools in all of my career. These are the things I was looking for that nobody had. Nobody even knew that this was a thing that needed to be taught. So that's why I've developed these processes, is learning how to unpack, uncover, rename, and define your professional identity requires some different tool sets. So that's what my workbook and other tools go through. And then I also work with teams. People bring me in to work with companies for professional development or team building or culture building, because I sit with a room of people and I say, you guys have been working together for how long, but do you know each other? And you might know some of their hobbies or some of their talents or some of their side things or their family, but have you ever asked them, if you didn't have this job title, what would you call yourself? And people are like, what? So yeah, it's sort of a moment. And so that's what is so powerful about this work, going to part 2 of developing leadership and also developing stronger culture and talent, is when other people see them for who they want to be seen as and value them and recognize them and understand their professional identity, more people feel belonging and more people feel like I matter. People get me. I'm not just a name on the board or another person on staff. Now, from a
Right.
leadership point of view, I think what's empowering is when you're in performance reviews or you're going for a promotion, you have to sit and check in with a boss at some point or a manager. And they say, okay, tell me, what you've done and the projects. I always would connect that back to my professional identity. I'd say, well, Jen, this year we worked on this project and this work stream. And, the way I see myself in this role, I use that phrase a lot. The way I see myself in this role, even though my title is program director, I'm still an artist and a designer and a researcher. And so what I'm bringing into the projects we completed this year, the designer part of me and the artist did this, and I was able to weave, and see that opportunity the rest of the team missed because I have this creative side. So I'm using a reference map of why my different identities, not just skills, but my identities matter to the role. That illustrates a very strong argument for my value and the work outcome. And I think your ability to talk about yourself with that much confidence shows your leadership, shows yourself, shows you have a sense of why you're there and what you contribute. And to me, that's being a role model, and that's mentoring and helping other people see if you can do it that way and reveal more of yourself. Well, wouldn't they want to too? Like, you gain respect, you gain trust, you gain leadership. So those are some thoughts on that.
Certainly helps with the authenticity part of being
Yes.
a leader.
Yes, for sure. Because you're not just telling a personal story. I've had a lot of leaders feel like they're opening up, who they are by talking about their family. But I don't even know their backstory of how they got the role in the first place. Like, I've had all these leaders I've worked for, and I didn't know they were lawyers in training, or that they had a background as a mountaineer, or that, they're bringing this environmentalism perspective into the role because that's part of who they are. So opening up our professional identities opens up understanding between each other. Definitely vulnerability.
Yeah, I think some of the audience would be interested to hear about any top tips you could recommend. Not your, I mean, they have to buy the book and the
I
workbook to
know.
really go through the whole process. But if you have
Yeah, I
like one
have
or
some
two top tips,
favorite.
you can
Yeah.
give them.
So if you look at my blog, I'm always sharing a lot of action packed tips and really relevant things, as well as some theory from time to time. And you can get on my newsletter, which is where I share stuff too. So here's one of my top tips. It's called the 2-word title or the 3-word title. And I want you to play with this tonight. So first of all, it's coming up with one identity word that's kind of resonating with you, maybe strategist. So you can pick something that's a little more generic or a little bit more familiar to you. And then the next question is, okay, if you feel like your professional identity is a strategist, what kind of strategist are you? So there's millions of strategists in the world, but the next level is to add a descriptor, either before or after it. So maybe you're an idea strategist, or a relational strategist, or an architectural strategist. So you find that descriptor that gives a little bit more specificity. Now, the third layer, that's the 2-word job title. And even just that much helps you stand out because you're not just using blanket language. Like if you're a life coach, it's like, what kind of life coach? So the 3-word job title is where you add a discipline in there. So for me, I'm a disruptor. That's my first identity word. What kind of disruptor am I? I'm a creative one because I have all this art background. But really, you could argue that today I'm a creative career disruptor. I'm focused in the domain of career development and helping people think about who they are in their work. So as a creative career disruptor, you get a whole different picture of me. Those 3 words shape a different sense of what I do and what I stand for. So that's a top tip, is to play with these 2-word and 3-word titles for yourself.
I like how it kind of funnels in, right?
Yeah.
Creative, disruptor,
Yeah,
and then career disruptor became the middle name, I guess you could say.
exactly. Yeah. Yeah, it's taxonomies. I like to think back in biology class, we learned there's kingdom, phylum, class, family, genus, species. We go from really wide to really narrow.
Yeah.
And I played this game one time. You'll get a kick out of this. I was on LinkedIn and I said, okay, type in the word disruptor into the LinkedIn search. How many people have the word disruptor in their header? And I got a few million hits. So disruptor is not that unique. But then I typed in creative disruptor. I got far fewer hits, maybe 100. It's been a while since I've done it, but there are millions of people on LinkedIn. So it's a way for me to understand the language I'm using, if I'm being true about myself, shouldn't be used by millions of people. It should be used by just a handful. The goal really of defining yourself and your professional identity is finding, it's a term called optimal distinctiveness. You want to stand out and fit in simultaneously, optimal distinctiveness. So if I'm calling myself a creative disruptor, there needs to be enough familiarity that people kind of get it, but also it needs to like shock them and make them go, whoa, wait, what is that term? Like, say it again. You're trying to get people to lean in. The intrigue is a key indicator that you've landed on a really good name for yourself because you're not just being stereotyped anymore.
It conveys your distinctiveness. It also would convey confidence.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, you have to be careful. People push me on this because they use really cool, trendy language like, well, I'm a design thinking guru, or I'm like a coding whiz. And you're like, what does that mean? Like, that's just catchy and cute. And it's also corny and it doesn't make me like interested. So the words you choose really matter. They have to mean something to you. They have to be real. And then again, they have to be evidence backed. I can demonstrate 3, 4, 10 things I've done that show where I've been a creative disruptor. I've challenged the status quo. I've added value in new ways. I've disrupted things that had never been done before. So I can back it up.
Yes. And like the examples you gave, the software whiz might undermine your credibility.
Right. Totally. Yeah. It definitely makes people go, oh, this person's just immature or doesn't know what they're talking about. So it can hurt you for sure. I think that's the fear I hear from people putting it in their LinkedIn or making it public. Like, how will this make me sound? And then I have the people that change it every 5 minutes, or they're like, oh, today I'm this and tomorrow I'm that. That also does you a disservice. You've got to be consistent. Take your time and try on and really practice these words before you make them too public, like put it on a business card or your email. You have to feel confident saying it. Like, I would meet people in a coffee meeting and I'd be saying, hey, Marc, I wanted to get to know you better. I know we're working on this project. Tell me about yourself. And he'd learn about me. And somewhere in that conversation, I'd say, I think of myself in this job like I'm a hybrid professional because I'm combining my art and my art researcher and designer background. And that's helping me. And he'd go, oh, and in that moment, I was practicing. And in that moment, I was watching his reaction and feeling, did he get me more? Like, you can just sense if someone's connecting with that. And the more I did that just one-on-one in little meetings with different colleagues, it started to just become natural. And actually, let me add this story. When I knew it was working, it was sort of magical. I was standing in the hallway one day and my boss was next to me and these two strangers walked up, or strangers to me, and she knew them. They were like her next meeting. And so what do you do when you're in a hallway standing with people? Everyone goes around and makes a quick introduction. And my boss is like, oh, Terry and Sam, this is Sarabeth. She's our program director, but she's really this creative disruptor because she's changing all these things around the campus. In that moment, I was, first of all, shocked. I was like, oh my God, my boss just used my language. But imagine, I felt amazing because I felt like my boss got me. She knew who I was and she used my own language about me. That is, to me, the hallmark. When other people start talking about you the way you want to be seen, then your personal brand is resonating. Your identity is coming through. People are really getting you the way you want to be understood.
Wow, that's powerful. That's a great
Yeah.
example. Now, before we're going to have some announcements at the end of this hour,
Okay.
and it's about the after event for some of the member groups, and that'll be a Zoom format where people can ask personalized questions to Dr. Berk, who has agreed to stay another 30 minutes to meet some of these audiences, the VIP group.
Great.
So Kathy is going to announce that in about 5 minutes.
Okay.
But before we get to that, there's a very interesting question about if you have a hybrid identity, what are ways you could discover hybrid professional opportunities that match your identity?
Totally. Yeah, the job market.
Yeah.
I would say if you were to type a search and you're looking for a new job and you're like, I want a job that takes hybrid professionals, first of all, you're going to get a lot of jobs right now that are about hybrid work. This is remote and in person. So there's a lot of other sort of implied ways. I see job descriptions that actually say we need someone who works at the intersection of. So that phrasing I mentioned earlier that you should use is also in job descriptions sometimes. I saw YouTube post something like this department's at the intersection of art and media and design and marketing or something. Other triggers that are emblematic that it's a hybrid, they need a hybrid professional is this role is cross-functional. It works between departments or between teams. We need someone with inside and like internal and external abilities, like so working outside the community and inside the community. Dual reporting. So you can hear it in my language that these roles are hinting at a both and or two opposite things that they need someone who can combine. It's a little bit different than just saying we need someone who can do A, B, C, D, E. Any job that's interdisciplinary, that's a really key word. Those are some of my top tips of language to be on the lookout for. And there's many more, but read between the lines. A lot of jobs need a hybrid professional, but they don't know that's the language of how to trigger it.
It sounds like some of the words in a hybrid title could be some domain expertise. Like I'm a expert on European, software markets or software marketing or something like that. If that's been your focus, is that right? Like there could be a geographic element to it or a market segment.
I'm not sure. I'd have to think about that more, Mark. I'm not sure if I'm totally following that one.
Okay.
I think usually when things are really disparate, so it's like we need someone with background in art and science. You're like, who would have background in both art and science? But a lot of people today have multiple degrees or 10 years in this field and 10 years in that field. And you're like, oh, I have 20 years combined in both those fields. Mm-hmm. So you're looking for that kind of stuff where it could be the domain, it could be an interdisciplinary set of skills, it could be working between teams or across teams, that kind of language.
Okay. I've seen people using global whatever as a designator. Is that not an appropriate term then?
So this is getting into a bigger part of my theory. I really believe the workforce, it's a hybrid workforce these days. And let's break that into the who, what, and where. So the who is the talent, right? If we're talking about hybridity. And talent can have a hybrid professional identity. The what are hybrid skills. There are a lot of skills like AI combining into hospitality or something where now it's like that's a hybrid skill set. Okay. And then the where is hybrid workplaces, which means the location can be remote or in person. So the words hybrid are just in a very strange space right now with business because we just went through the pandemic and people are so focused on hybrid means where you work. Yeah. That's a different application than I'm using it as.
Okay.
Yeah.
So we're going to be taking a break and then moving to the Zoom.
Great.
And folks would be checking their WeChats. I want to turn the floor over to Kathy. Kathy, you want to make an announcement?
Yes, thank you both very much. Now let's switch to Chinese. 谢谢大家来参加 My Tuesday MyT 的讲座。然后下周的话也有一个新的讲座，所以下周的讲座是 Communication 怎么样 be more influential。然后没有加入我们职场群的哈，这个下个星期二也是同样的时间6点到7点。然后我们最后的半小时7点到7点半是 VIP 的闭门讨论，等会儿 VIP 的话在 VIP 群里面看通知。如果没有加入买底群的，现在请加入第5群。MyT.coach can you put the 请加入第5群哈。如果你已经在1、2、3、4群里面的，你就不用加入了。这个主要是给大家一些 seminar 的 information 啊，还有一些 article 啊，也欢迎大家加入MyT.coach 的 free membership。这样的话，你可以看到所有的 coaches write the articles，然后所有的 events， 线上线下在全美各地的 events， 我们在这打造一个华人北美职场的最大的职场圈。另外的话，我们每天提醒大家要开心健身，要提高自己的气质，要提高自己的能量。如果你有兴趣加入开心健身的，我们现在已经有10个群，还没有加入的朋友也请欢迎加入开心健身群。Please put the Funfitness WeChat code， 好吗？然后谢谢大家。我们 MyT Tuesday 通常就是每个星期二西部的6点到7点，欢迎大家加入。谢谢大家。如果你在职场上遇到问题，如果你需要 coach help you， 如果你需要seeking mentorship， 请加入 MyT.coach。 谢谢大家。 VIP 们现在请看群里的信息，进入你们自己开麦的 close 距离的直接问话。谢谢大家。看看如果大家有什么问题，我在这多待几分钟。 VIP 们请进入 private room。
Okay. Sarabeth, if you want to join us in the Zoom link.
Yeah, you too join
Perfect.
the VIP room. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. See you soon.
其他人有什么问题吗？谢谢大家的加入。MyD, could you put the slide on how to join MyT.coach？ 这个很简单哈，这些都是我们为华人培养了很多华人高管的executive coaches， 在这里为大家服务。所以如果你 performance review 如果你 interview 如果你 negotiate package， 如果你 deal with tough bosses， 如果你不知道怎么样成功的 fulfill first 90 days， 欢迎加入这个平台，找到你自己合意的老师。谢谢大家。有什么问题的话，可以跟我们联系，好吗？谢谢。